When I start talking about this sort of thing, the weather changes, the volcanism, the earthquakes, and so forth, I start getting these angry political faxes, people who hate Al Gore or hate the president, which is fine. I don't care if they hate him. But they get angry at me for spreading the lies of those who are saying this is occurring. Now, maybe Vice President Gore is wrong about global warming. Who the hell knows? But the weather obviously is changing. And so I don't see why people are getting angry about that. It's just a fact. It's right in front of us. It's occurring right now.
Well, when you see records broken, I mean, the British Meteorological Office has no hold with, Gore or Clinton or whatever.
I know it.
And there are other people on the other side of the aisle politically. I want to talk about Francis Barwood in a little while.
Yeah, I do too.
Who is very important in bringing to light a lot of things that are now kind of kept in the closet that will provide us solutions. And she's obviously not in the Gore camp. But the point is that this is an apolitical problem. This is neither Republican or Democrat or liberal or independent or libertarian. This is a terrestrial problem. And given that we've been looking at data that's beyond the Earth of outer planets and long-term time trends, to ascribe this to very short-term historical usage of certain fossil fuels or whatever is to miss the point. That we don't know everything there is to know about astronomy and physics and geology and chemistry and all that, and that's why we fund sciences. And what Gore is depending upon is the best input he's getting, which is not the secret black budget input. It is the mainstream, common NASA, what the hell is going on input. And unless there are more models on the table to choose from, you can see the effect, you won't know the cause. And what I'm trying to do tonight is to point at another possibilities for the cause, because unless we figure out the cause, we're not going to come up with the correct solutions.
Is there a solution?
Yes, there is.
Now let us take your hyperdimensional paper at face value and say we understand it, we believe it is so. How can you take what you know and apply it to an actual solution?
Well, it depends on the problem. Remember your friend Michio Kaku?
Yes.
And his wonderful discussion of Type 0, Type 1, Type 2 civilization.
Yes, sir.
Which, by the way, he borrowed from the Russians. It was a Russian named Kardashev who actually first came up with this concept back in the 50s. And his companion author, Shklovsky, I.S. Shklovsky, who wrote a book with Carl Sagan called Intelligent Life of the Universe, where the concept of civilizations being graded according to type, basically according to how much energy they control. That's the mechanism of grading.
Okay.
And I don't know, offhand, let me see if I remember what it was. Type 0 was you control basically, enough energy to run lights on a continent. A Type 1 controls energy on a planetary scale. A Type 2 controls energy on a stellar scale. And a Type 3 controls energy on a galactic scale.
Okay.
We need to go from 0 to Type 1. That's the long and the short of it.
All right. How do we do that?
This physics provides us with mechanisms to alter the behavior of parts of the environment we don't like. In other words, what's the real cause of earthquakes? Is it plates sliding past each other, the zipper effect that we've all been told for years and years and years?
That's what we've been told.
That's what we've been told. So why, the other day, I think you had Standeo on, okay, and he was talking about earthquakes at the South Pole?
Yep.
There aren't any plates at the South Pole, boys and girls, but there is a hyperdimensional hotspot, like there is on the North Pole of Saturn. On our website, if you go and you look at this paper, you will see a composite image that I've created.
There are no plates on the South Pole?
No.
Then how can they have earthquakes?
Exactly. You got your finger on it.
No, I don't. I heard what you said. That's all.
Activity at the South Pole. Mount Elbrus has been burping and doing interesting things, which is the major volcano down in the Antarctic. But there are no plates that are rifting apart the South Pole. If there were, Antarctica would not have remained a continent. All right, it would have sundered like the African rift. The Rift Valley is tearing Africa apart.
Well, now wait a minute. This has got to be then a big challenge for geologists. I mean, what would they say if you said to a geologist there are no plates there? How can they have earthquakes? What would the geologist say?
Well, there are no plates on the East Coast, and there are no plates under the Madras Fault. Some of the worst earthquakes have occurred in the middle of continents. I mean, that's just historical data. The theory as to why you get terrible earthquakes along the Madras Fault is kind of lagging. We've only had the theory of plate tectonics, Art, since the 1960s. Since the Glomar Challenger and the people at Lamont Doherty went around and drilled cores around in the bottoms of most of the oceans, and came up with this idea. It's a theory, not fact. It's a theory. Now, it seems to explain quite a few things, but there are a lot of things about geophysics that the plate tectonic theory does not explain.
But they have, with lasers, for example, measured the movement of plates against each other.
I'm not saying the plates are not moving. I'm just saying that that's not the ultimate answer to all earthquakes and all geophysical activity.
Okay.
And what's going on at the South Pole right now is pretty interesting, because the hyperdimensional model predicts that not only are you going to see a lot of activity, but that's probably the reason why you're getting a lot of melting. All right?
And by the way, there is a lot of... That's another story I'm following.
Yep.
They're talking about the possibility now, Richard, of the whole damn thing melting.
Yep.
And if that occurred, sea levels, they say, could rise by as much as 50 feet.
That's because of the bathtub effect.
Now, 50 feet. Do you know what would happen if sea levels rose 50 feet?
Why do you think I'm not in New York?
I guess you know what would occur.
Yes, yes. In other words, if you take the ice and you plunk it down off the continent into the ocean.
Majority of our population lives right along that.
That's right.
Either one of the coasts.
That's right.
Yeah.
So major planetary changes that are kind of happening because of much bigger reasons than, burning coal, are critical to figure out so we can do something. All right? Now, how do you do something?
That's my question.
You have to go to a type 1. You must control the energies on a planetary scale, and that means you have to think in terms of generators, in terms of grid points. Remember we keep talking about latitudes and longitudes in this hyperdimensional model.
Yes.
Well, we have relics. We have ancient architecture scattered around this planet that our guys have now told us are basically tombs.
The pyramids.
Pyramids. Maybe they weren't tombs. Maybe, as our physics predicts, they are huge hyperdimensional transducers sitting atop critical points on the global grid as an effort by a previous cycle of civilization to control this energy on a planetary scale and to keep Earth habitable for people living in certain regions.
If that is true, then it should be pointed out they ain't here anymore and we are.
Because maybe the problem was bigger than even they thought. In other words, there are escalating sets of problems. There's the short-term stuff of climate and weather and volcanoes. And the easiest way to get around volcanoes and earthquakes is not to live where they occur. All right? We know pretty well now where it's dangerous to live. And we know pretty well where, climate-wise, it's not good to try to maintain a civilization. But in terms of the biggest problem of all, I mean, let's hit it right on the head.
But wait a minute. Let's not leave what you just said.
Okay.
Don't live where these problems occur. Take the Ring of Fire, Richard.
That's right.
It runs all the way up South America. It runs right up the west coast of America, on up through Alaska, over to Japan, and on around. Now, you're talking about, I don't know, maybe an eighth of the world's population, maybe more. So
That's
you can't just blow right by that. Don't live where the problem is. I mean, there's a lot of people.
The problem is that if you live where the problem is and it gets too severe, you're not going to be living. In other words, it is a self-correcting problem. It's like living on a river delta or living in an arroyo. You range in the mountains, you put your tent in the arroyo, you're not going to have a tent. If you're not careful, you're not going to have yourself.
Well, but I would imagine that your dimensional physics model offers answers that don't require everybody moving away from these areas.
Provided the government, the structure we have established, promote the common defense.
Yes.
Turns its energies from killing people to defending us from the very physics that makes life possible. In other words, this requires a combination of foresight, vision, resources, and cooperation on a scale the human race is not known for.
But killing people is very important. We have a big budget for killing people.
Well, we could have a big budget for protecting people from being killed.
What a revolutionary idea.
Isn't that?